All right, welcome to Self, Emotional Wellness for Men. My name is Courtney Brame, and let me tell y'all, it's been a chaotic last several weeks for me. Um, I had my birthday November 10th, and I just turned 36 years old. And this birthday was quite emotional for me. I think the main topic that I want to talk about today is grief. um, I think that I've had enough experience with it, and it's been kind of in my face, especially over the last maybe 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks or so. And people around me grieving, and I'm having my own experience with it, and then it's compounded by the kind of grief that other people are having as well. So I thought I would just speak to that. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be talking about today. But to first do the intro, of course, I got the Black Men's Emotional Wellness Symposium coming up this Saturday, November 30th. If you missed the previous one that was held June 30th, I had Brick City Buddha, Jeremy Hurt from Let's Talk Bro podcast, Teddy the comedian, and then Cam Fraser, who's an Australian men's sex coach and certified sexologist. I was certified sex educator, sexologist. I apologize if I'm messing up your title, Cam. But these were four really awesome conversations. We had 107-ish people show up for it. It was a day-long event, midday, where we just had conversations around men's sexuality, community as Black men. We talked about mental health, suicide ideation, depression, and then we also got to talk about emotional intelligence and uh, relationship, more focused stuff than exclusively dating. And these were all really great conversations to have. And for the upcoming symposium, what we're going to do is dive into deconstructing the high value man. If you are someone who is here, you've probably heard the phrase high value man. You probably heard the phrase red pill, or you heard about the manosphere, any of those things. And one of the, I would say, pulls that I have to speaking about it is that so much of it is telling men what to do, how to act, how to be towards women, and there really isn't any space for self inquiry. It's almost like we're just subscribing to programming and beliefs that very much work generally for the general population. But if you're somebody who's seeking that out, like, you shouldn't be someone who is the general population or average, right? I do believe that the way that they speak to it, yeah, it applies to the majority or the general population. But I don't know, man. I just think that more people are striving towards something that they don't actually want, and we're not directing people into intentionality. Now there's a couple of dating coaches who are in there and that's in that field that I hear they encourage men like, hey, know where you are. Like, self-awareness is so key, and a lot of the content that's out there isn't about self-awareness. It's go make money and then you'll have options. And it's like, well, what if I have like a better quality of options, right? Like, that's not in our face. So I want to deconstruct this from four angles. I want to look at it from a fitness perspective, which is more about our blood pressure, cholesterol, our internal health, our blood circulation, respiratory health, and speak to Dr. Roger Stewart, who's a physician. And we're going to be talking about that as well as sexual health because that's important. And then we're going to be talking with Ade. I did not pronounce his last name right if it's not in front of me, so I ain't going to even try to do that. He's a breath work coach. We're going to be looking at how spirituality as a lens into what it means to be high value. We're going to talk about his experience, his story, uh, coming into a space of spirituality, especially as a Black man. I just don't see that in these settings where it needs to be uplifted. And then we're going to talk to Anthony Tony, who on Instagram is I Am Controversy. And the conversation is really going to be about leadership. And I'm sure we're going to drift off into how dating is dead and how polyamory doesn't do anything for the Black family. This is a really uh, I want to say hot topic conversation because of where I am in my life. Like I've been non-monogamous and looking at my grief, which I'll speak to here a little bit more. Um, might have just been some sort of a coping mechanism for my grief. So I haven't talked about this with another person, like on a public platform, but I think that engaging in a conversation about that might bring up some of my own personal experiences. Uh, and so, yeah, I'm looking forward to like being vulnerable for real at this symposium. And then lastly, we've got Mike Joseph. He's a podcast host of the Detoxicity podcast. We're going to be looking at masculinity. We're going to be talking about, um, I think self awareness is what's going to come up. But he is a gay black man, and I, as a straight black man, I don't know that there's a lot of spaces for or where we kind of coexist in a way where other black men can see that or even people see that. And all of these conversations really reflect this yoga concept of the koshas, which are the five sheaths of the self. So we've got the physical body where we're talking about fitness. We've got the energy or breath body where we're talking about spirituality. We've got the mind and emotions body where we're talking about leadership and sense of purpose. And then we've got the inner wisdom body where we're going to be looking at, this idea of masculinity, our identity, our core identity, from our own inner intellect and wisdom. And all of this really gives us the framework of the what is called bliss body or the Anandamaya kosha. And this really speaks to like what brings us joy, like who we are, as beings who are expressive and maybe who are aligned in these other four areas. So that's my angle here. I'm really working to integrate yoga into a lot of the work that I do, all of the work that I do. It's informed it behind the scenes, but now it's really time for me to bring it out there more. I am a practicing yoga therapist in training. I've been working with people for the last month under mentorship and guidance from um, well, I guess she'll be one of my instructors going into next year. But yeah, at Inner Peace Yoga Therapy, I'm almost done with my 300-hour training, which is the introductory to it, the introductory course to it. And then I'll be transitioning into completing the course, which is another 500 hours. And I'm looking to, yeah, just bring this yoga therapy in a way that is visibly, psychologically, and financially accessible to the people who maybe have not heard of it or maybe don't even see it as a reputable healing modality to be able to support people. And essentially, what that is, if you haven't, please, you can just go back and listen to the Self episode about yoga therapy for men, yoga therapy for black men, I believe is what I called it, or that it is for black people too, black men. And in that, like podcasts. That was a while ago. And as I've been practicing, I'm seeing that there's so much more to it. Right now, I mostly work with people, I only work with people who have herpes. I've not met anyone who's reached out to me about yoga therapy outside of that, but it's something that kind of guides the way that I give advice to my friends. I might not go into the technicalities of it, but I know in my mind that a lot of what yoga is and what it does is it goes back to the elements. And when we look at the elements, there's earth, fire, air, water, and ether, which is otherwise known as space. And all of us embody these things. And where there are imbalances, that's where it shows up in our life. And speaking to those and speaking to that is the framework at which we start to self inquire. We incorporate some movement, breathing, exercises, meditation, and of course, like talking and journaling. But there's a whole lot of self inquiry where we're finding out what the body has to say as well as what your words have to say, and it's really cool. I think that this actually is my career path. Like I've been able to get paid to do my case studies, and I look forward to bringing that to the forefront. So, all right, looking at grief, right? So, what is grief? I wish I had my laptop in front of me so I can give you like an absolute definition, but I can tell you some things about it. Grief is it stems from attachment, right? Like, so we have an attachment to something. There's this process of intense emotions that are interconnected with fear of losing that attachment. And the attachment can be something as simple as I look at it from an STI sexual health standpoint. If you get a herpes diagnosis, right? And now, with that diagnosis, your attachment to your sexuality has shifted because now maybe you don't have a familiarity with how you're going to be able to have sex. Or if you are experiencing issues with getting an erection, there may be some grief there if you are just noticing that your body's changing, if there's aging that's happening, or if you don't stay as hard or last as long as you used to, there might be some grief there. Most commonly, people associate grief with loss, death, but grief can happen in a loss where the person didn't die, where maybe a relationship ends, maybe there's a transition in your career, and it is so complex that there are moments where we might feel sad, we might feel angry, we might feel frustrated, we might feel moments of happiness, we might even feel relieved, we may even feel guilt about the happiness that we feel about having lost something that we've been attached to or lost someone we've been attached to, right? So there are all of these emotions here, and I don't know that it's necessarily scientifically relevant to go into understanding all of what grief is and all of the ways that it can manifest and all of the ways that it might impact you for you to understand your own grief. And one of the ways to do that is that you have to be with it. I will always encourage people to, if you are willing to or wanting to work through this grief, find a health professional, mental health professional, therapist of some sort who is able to support you in that. My understanding of grief from my own experience is the only one that I feel most comfortable speaking to. And with this example, I hope that it invites you to look at your own relationship to your grief. And I encourage you to do so if this is something that you feel called to. So get your journal out. This is going to be uh, this is the grief episode. Let's just call it that. So my birthday is November 10th. I was born in 1988, and I believe it was 2001 on my 13th birthday, where my grandmother she passed away not too long before my birthday, and her funeral ended up being on my birthday. And I remember so many vivid details of this day. I remember my like sitting across from my aunt in a limo coming from the funeral. I remember looking at her in the wake and seeing this body that was supposed to be my grandma, but didn't look anything like her. And I remember laughing. Like I looked in there and I went, that ain't my fucking grandma. And nobody could tell me that was her. So I didn't cry because I didn't believe it. I was very much in denial about what was going on there. And here I am at now 36 years old. And for the last 4 years, since I started seeing the therapist in 2020, I would say that I recognize that I get real agitated easily or frustrated around my birthday every year. And I think for me to, explain like what that frustration is, I got to give you a few examples. Some of those frustrations have looked like me typically ending relationships somewhere between October and my birthday. Like Halloween was one, I know for sure. That one ended ugly. Um, and I would find myself, yeah, like in situations where I look up and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? And I would look for ways or reasons to just like get out, or I would even self-sabotage these relationships by doing some shit that puts the relationship in jeopardy. And I don't think that I really became aware of that until this go around. So this is 4 years ago where I acknowledged, damn, I get weird around my birthday. My therapist said, oh, go do something fun. Go and do something that helps you with just honoring your grandmother. And so I tried these things, and every year, like, there's been a thing that would like remind me of her. The first year I did it, I went to a restaurant. I love Cajun food. I go to this restaurant, I look at the menu beforehand. I didn't even want to leave my house. It was the year 2020, so I sold my car. I had the Uber, and I was just like rationalizing it. Man, it's about to be $100 birthday. I got an Uber there. I got an Uber back. I got to get my food, and I got to wear a mask. And there's all this stuff going on around that, right? So my grandfather comes over. He was the one who he was married to my grandmother. Um, at one point, they divorced long before she died. But we had a conversation, and he was like, "Yeah, man, here go $100." He just fucking gave me $100. So I get that, and he was like, "Yeah, go ahead and go take yourself out to eat." And I just told him, I was like, "Hey, I'm feeling like I miss my grandma." And he just kind of like his demeanor changed. And he was like, "Boy, she sure fought for you." Then he said it again. I was like, "What you mean?" And then he like shifted the subject as if he didn't want to go more into it, and that bothered me in a way that I wasn't gonna push for it, but it reminded me of the story that I know about my pre-birth that I should know, that I don't think anybody should know, but I do. And that story is that my mom's parents wanted her to get an abortion because she was pregnant with me at age 17, had me at 18, and my grandmother, who's my dad's mom, she was the person who, supported what my mom wanted to do. And so my mom ran away from home. She got to live with my grandmother. And eventually, the more part of the grief was me putting more of these puzzle pieces together. So I went back and I had some conversations with my family about what was happening around that time. And I'll get into that soon. I don't want to jump around from the story first. But yeah, he told me, my grandfather, he told me that she fought for me. And then not too long after that, he had to leave. So I was like, you know what, man, that money just came out of nowhere. I didn't want to spend it, but, why not? So I take that $100 and I call me an Uber. I Uber to the restaurant, and I had already known what I was getting. I was going to get shrimp and grits, this voodoo shrimp, and some crab cakes. So I saw the pictures. I thought I read the descriptions and everything, but I get to the restaurant. I order some blue drink, and I had my appetizers came out. The voodoo shrimp. I'm eating the voodoo shrimp, and then the crab cakes come out. And I was like, ooh, this is weird. Why would they put a crab cake on top of an onion ring? Oh well, I'll try it. So I cut into it. It's kind of dark in the restaurant, so I take a bite, and my eyes just start fucking welling up, y'all. I just start like I'm about to cry, and I looked down and I put the light up to it, and then I read the description, y'all. It was fried green tomatoes, not onion rings. My grandmother would always make fried green tomatoes, and this was in 2020. Okay, so I'm in this restaurant. I'm like trying not to cry, and it just felt like a very beautiful moment for me that my grandmother, while she's not physically here, I heard one of my yoga therapy instructors, Antonio, I can't say his last name, Susis, but he does yoga for grief relief, yoga therapy for grief relief. And he said, our loved ones are never gone. They are always interwoven in the tapestry of our hearts. And it was just like that moment was a plucking of that thread, letting me know that, yeah, her physical body's not here, but my grandmother is still with me. My memories of her, and even though like time passes, I don't have many memories of her up to the age of turning 13, and those like young childhood memories, they are fading away. And there's a specific memory that I have. I remember like my grandma's mannerisms. I remember my grandma was crazy. She used to make up words. She saw demons, y'all. But this was the first woman who like loved me, alongside my mom. There's of course like my mom's birthing me, but this was the woman who fought for me, who fought my grandfather, who's a very scary man. He's scary. And I can't imagine him in his prime at, 30 years old, 30 whatever, 40 years old, about to become a grandpa. you know so um i I had that moment, and it was just like this. And I fought it. I fought crying. I didn't want to cry. I fought that. And even after that, that was in 2020, I remember I was in my yoga teacher training. So in my yoga teacher training, there was a 200 hour that I think I had just finished, and then going into 2021, there was my 300 hour. And in my 300 hour, that was more about the philosophy and understanding some concepts. In my 200 hour, I learned how to tell people how to get into positions. I learned some basic terms, right? But the 300 hour was much more self reflective. And I think I got to know myself at an emotional level. So there was a day I remember, and it was probably that early October coming up on my birthday. And I remember saying to myself, if things don't change for me, as far as like money, as far as my career, because I was probably making like there were weeks where I would make no money, or I was only making like $100 a week. Sometimes I'd make like $300 a week as a personal trainer and just running my nonprofit, something positive for positive people. The pandemic, that money that we got for the unemployment was what kept me afloat, but I knew that that wasn't gonna last for long. So I was using that to invest in paying for people to get therapy, to grow my nonprofit, which was a great investment because now I'm able to pay myself more consistently. It took some years, but we're here now. And so I remember I was like doing not a happy baby pose or knees to my chest, and I just started crying. I remember the song Jay-Z Beach Chair. I don't know what it is about that song, but I listen to it and I just get these like waves of emotion running through me. And so I was like, I cried a little bit. I cried. It wasn't like I wanted it to come out. It felt like it needed to, but it was just fucking stuck. And I've been reading, I've been hearing about how good it is to cry because for so long I've been told, don't cry. Men aren't supposed to cry. We got to be tough. We got to be hard for everybody else. And that constantly plays in my head up until recently, I would say. But that was playing in my head even at these points where I needed to cry. I ain't even cry when my grandma died. What I'm gonna just randomly cry because they said in yoga sometimes when you move a certain way you unleash emotions and you might cry. Like, that sounded like bullshit to me until it happened. When it happened to me, woo, that was different. So I started like formulating a plan. It would probably have been in like August, September to move to Portland, Oregon. And it was just something was calling me there. Something was calling me to Portland, Oregon. I had a couple of board members to that nonprofit that lived there. I had some friends who lived there. And I ended up finding the opportunity to get a $10,000 grant from my nonprofit, something positive for positive people. And I took it. I was able to get it, and I just needed to be a resident. So um, I was planning my move. And around planning this move, I was dating someone and she and I just had the ugliest falling out, and I did not like myself and how I was at that point in time. And we had like a shared community, and I remember how I responded to that, and it was just ugly. It was very ugly. I kept a voice message to myself from that night to remember that I would never go back to that situation ever again or put myself in a position to become that person that I became. I didn't put my hands on her or anything. It was just like I didn't like some of the things that I said, the way that I talked, the way that I had to take accountability. I didn't like none of that shit. And ultimately, this relationship was just one that needed to end. And it felt like, I don't know that I can say I'm the one who ended it because her behaviors in it and my behaviors in it, you know, two people striving towards being healthy didn't need to be together. And even in that, like there were things in that relationship and aspects of it where I wasn't practicing what I preach. I talk all that integrity shit, but there were things that I did that weren't integritous, if that's a word. And I think that a lot of that really does stem from a lot of uncertainty, and as someone who was navigating non-monogamous relationships at that point in time, like even following the Instagram experts at non-monogamy, I wasn't doing that shit right. Let's just call it what it is. I wasn't doing it right. And so even there in that relationship ending, like I still believed that there was going to be a relationship that continued even outside of that, but it wasn't. And it needed to not be. And the where I tie grief in with this is that this was again 2021, where I bring grief into this particular situation, because there were like the highs and lows, the pushes, the pulls, the ups and downs. And part of it was also my attachment to not the relationship, but an aspect of it that I liked about myself. She had a son, and while I liked her, I loved her son and saw myself in that relationship of wanting to be like a role model, wanting to be a stepdad. I had a very strong attachment to this identity as being a father, being a stepdad, right? Like, cool. This was kind of tight. And when I, got to a point of the disrespect and the boundaries and the self disrespect violations that I had for myself, it didn't become about me and her. That was a no brainer, but it then became about my attachment to this kid, and I had to grieve that. I had to grieve the loss of that relationship to him and to her, and how I saw like what a future looked like, even if it had to be a little bit of a long distance relationship, right? And I never talked about this like to anyone. Um, and I, fuck, man, that's what this podcast is. This podcast is literally like me working through emotions in a way that just I haven't had the courage. I would say that it's courage. I haven't had the courage or the safety to be able to work through these feelings that I have, or uh damn, I ain't gonna say I'm getting choked up, but like I feel what's happening in my body, like this wave over the back of my nape of my neck and my shoulders, and I feel that like I'm feeling the I guess this is what vulnerability is, being able to have the moments of self-reflection. And my girlfriend right now, like, y'all, she's wonderful. Shout out to Dakota. I'm gonna just shout her out like here and by name, because is she a real one. She a real one. And as hard as it is for me to talk about things, I think that having her in my life has really made me not only more intentional, but also like presented me with this accountability that I can't say that I've had in non-monogamous relationships in the past. Like, I have been able to do whatever the fuck I wanted to do, and there haven't really been consequences. There might be like a boundary set, but at the end of the day, like, I was able to do what I wanted to do, and I associate it with not the other person, people not caring, but just me looking at like I don't know how to name this, but almost like a sense of I don't have language for it. I really don't have language for it, but this accountability and vulnerability maybe was something that I myself have been unavailable to be able to express. Maybe I had been unavailable, um, as emotionally available and intelligent as I consider myself to be. I've not always been the most emotionally available looking back, and I masked that through finding myself in sexual situationships, relationships with people who too were perhaps emotionally unavailable, or unavailable because they're in relationships. They have the thing that is vulnerable for me to ask for or give. So I can put a limitation on this relationship by just keeping it, a sexual relationship. But that accountability, those non-sexual aspects of non-monogamy, I think are what I've learned the most from in my experience, in my dating experience, and being in a relationship, because it gave me the freedom to exercise like relationship Courtney in the dating sense, by just being like, hey, I'm seeing multiple people. Most people have a problem with this. Are you okay with that? And they say, yeah. And it's like, oh, thank God. That's the worst thing, the hardest thing about me. So now I can just be myself. And being myself never really came with any challenging of, well, Courtney, you say this, but you do this. What is your intention? Have you thought about like why you do that thing? or why you want this. What do you want? Right? Like people ask, what do you want? And, people are so very, can be so passive in that conversation that, just saying something is enough to pacify a person. But until you really have like the deep intimacy with a person, or that genuine care and curiosity and investment and interest from another person, you may not get to that point. You know, someone who is a mirror to a lot of people may not be able to be a one-on-one mirror to you. And this was something that I learned through my experiences with non-monogamy as a person grieving, especially because there was just a lack of intentionality. There was no intentionality in my dating and my relationships, regardless if I thought there was. And as I started to brush up against the grief of my grandmother, and the fact that I, for 23 years, haven't really dealt with that grief, I'm looking back at these times and I'm able to much more clearly articulate what was happening, why things were happening the way they were. And a lot of it just comes down to attachment of identity, attachment to a story, attachment to a narrative of the, regardless of how great, people may call me for what I do. I might save people's lives. I might be a great guy, whatever. None of that means shit to me because my grandmother isn't here to see it. This is the woman who fought for me. Everybody around my mother wanted her to get an abortion except my grandma. And my dad, I talked to him too. He didn't want my mom to get an abortion either. But like, this is who fought for me. That was my first love. This delusional ass, crazy, schizophrenic, demon seeing woman was the one who first loved me, like who loved me first. This was my first love. And I now know this, and I can't like reciprocate. I can't close that circle. I can't say thank you. I can't say, look at what you believed in come into existence. Right. And that was my story. My story was, I need to prove I deserve to be here because people didn't want me here. I got to prove my grandmother right. So I got to be good. I got to do good. I got to be all of these things. And the reason it's so in my face right now is because this election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump was a, like that was on the forefront. This idea, this conversation about abortion and abortion access and abortion rights, all lumped under women's like health, women's rights, like all of that being lumped under there, and all of the, I should be able to get an abortion whenever I want. Like that shit's triggering for me, man. As somebody who wasn't aborted, who also doesn't have a right to say anything, especially in the environments that I'm in, that my career is in, like I ain't gonna lie, I'm a little bit like nervous about people judging me or looking at me different for having this belief of like, yo, I wasn't aborted. So like the way that I look at abortion is going to be much more like, it's not going to be what you would hope for it to be as a man, right? Who is in these sex positivity spaces or whatever. Like it just isn't. And I believe most people share a similar view of what my thoughts are. Like, no, it's not my body. It was my mom's body. My mom was able to make that choice, even though the opposite choice was about to be forced onto her. My mama told me they made the appointment. They was ready to take her to the clinic to get this abortion. And my mama didn't want to do that. And I think there's a lot of women who don't want to do that. There are women who do want to do that. But so much of my grief was activated by just that conversation. And I just so happen to be a healthcare educator to an extent to where I've learned about some of the medical complications that require abortion. And abortion isn't, I fucked someone, I got pregnant, and I don't want to have that person's baby. I need to get an abortion. That's not it. And that's seemingly what this is hyper focused on. I was an unplanned, unexpected pregnancy due to probably a lack of education and understanding. My mama told me she asked her dad for birth control. He was like, "What you need that for?" And didn't get it. Bam, here we are. There were a lot of factors that contributed to my birth and me being here. And that shouldn't be forced on anybody. Like I stand by that. I will stand by the fact that no one should be forced to have an abortion. No one should be forced to not have one. But there are like there's limitations. We got to be able to agree that past a certain point and under certain circumstances, these are what the options are. And I mean, I'm gonna be honest, like if the doctors don't want to do an abortion, they shouldn't have to do an abortion procedure. And if they want to, by all means, like go for it. But yeah, that's I felt like a need to just clarify like where I stand because yeah, as someone who wasn't aborted, like I'm probably more on the conservative side of abortion beliefs than I am on the liberal side. But again, past a certain point, I believe most people are okay with that, especially with the there's ectopic pregnancies. There are situations where people do want to have and deliver their baby, but it's going to create complications too, where the baby might not make it and the mother might not make it. So this gets a lot more complicated than just lumping abortion access under the umbrella of women's rights and women's health care. I think that's bullshit that they did that in the way that they did. But um, that being thrown in my face and also like seeing on social media like how men don't need to be talking about what happens with women's bodies and it's like yo we contribute to pregnancy and the conversation probably should be more on the men because of accountability and we are the ones who are choosing we can say no to even though society tells us that we have to be sexual and I think that that is oftentimes taken as take what you can get or you need to have sex you don't need to masturbate like get this nut off like we have a lot of messaging that perpetuates these unplanned unwanted pregnancies that lead to even the idealization of having to get an abortion. There are so many things pre that that through accurate, comprehensive sex education, we can mitigate those outcomes. But also, I really think that it falls onto the men to raise men to make better decisions and weigh their options, right? Like so many women are having to deal with the outcome of us not having done the work on ourselves to be able to do to our sons, our brothers, our fathers and uncles, even our cousins, our friends, our teammates, our peers. They're doing the work that we should be doing. And part of that manifests as this even being an issue where we got to talk about abortion access. We shouldn't be here. So, in rant, back to grief, right? So, I look at my relationships with women now through the lens of I've been pursuing an impossible love while also maintaining a certain amount of availability to where when that love comes in, I can have it. And even like, what was this last year? I was living in Portland, Oregon. Even last year, 2022, each year there's been like a thing, like a relationship that I think that there was just an inconsistency for myself where I'm doing too much. And I had to ask myself last year, like, what the fuck was I doing? And last year, man, like that, I so regret the way that I was, especially around my birthday last year, because it's haunting me even in my relationship. I don't think it is anymore, but it was really, really challenging for me to like get to a place of being able to really understand or want to understand what happened and be able to communicate like why it happened, how it happened, and be able to let that go. I have not been able to do that, especially with the harm that I've done to like my now girlfriend, who thanks to her challenging me and supporting me and giving me that I ain't gonna say like the same thing that I've been looking for from my grandmother, but or from that I got from my grandmother, but I think that I might have been able to resolve and close that circle just off of this birthday alone and how my girlfriend listened to me. And I was vulnerable with her. I had a day where I cried to her. I cried and I was just like, I miss my grandma. These are my like most prevalent memories of her. And she met me with that. She met me with something that like really I would say healed me. Like this woman healed me through having just heard my vulnerability, heard my grief, heard my pain, and be untangling that with her and being that space to just soften up for me to be able to say the things that I've not ever been able to say not even to myself or say out loud to another person, or to really feel like it's gonna be received right. She received it, and she fucking doubled down and met me with like giving me something that I will always like remember my grandmother by, despite like losing some of those memories. Like there are things that I very distinctly remember, and she met me with that shit, y'all. I love you. If you listen to this, I love you. Thank you. But oh, man, yeah, I see how grief and an avoidance of it, because I work a lot. I will work a lot, and I worked on my birthday. I worked not I didn't end up working on my birthday. I was scheduled to work on my birthday. I worked the day before my birthday. I was scheduled to work on my birthday, and I was gonna work the day after, which I did. But I just so happened to be able to like not go into work on November 10th, which was nice because I got to spend the whole day with her, and it was just pleasant, man. It was just real pleasant to have had this like full circle moment. And yeah, like I'm in a monogamous relationship. Looking back at what I was doing in my non-monogamous relationships, there was a lot that I did learn. I did learn a lot of what's important to me. Um, and I think that I accumulated the communication skills to be able to enter this relationship that started non-monogamous, but eventually, like, that wasn't working for me. And I was like, hey, listen, I'm gonna be monogamous, and I just kind of like held my breath and like waited, but it's like I ain't gonna tell you what to do, but this is what I'm doing. Like it is, I like you more than I like anybody else. And around the time where I was recognizing this, I made some. I didn't make decisions. I did not make good decisions. I didn't, and I'm very grateful that she was patient with me, and that she challenged me to understand and be able to communicate this to her, because I this Courtney Jr. mama, y'all. This is Courtney Jr. mama. I'm standing on it. But all of this to say, like, here we are at 36 years old, 4 years after I started like talking to a mental health professional, and really the answer was inside me, and nobody like brought it out of me. No one gave me a safety container to speak about this, um, nor did I, have the guidance to look at it until now. And in addition to this, like my girlfriend's grandmother, she just passed away. My condolences to her, um, and her family, of course. And this was like in the works for probably about a month. This had been like happening, and I got to watch her family grieve. Her family, her sister, whose birthday it was when their grandmother passed. And there was a moment where her sister and I were just talking, and I was like, "Hey, how are you?" And she was telling me like, "My grandma's gonna die. I hope her funeral's not on my birthday. Like, I hope she doesn't die on my birthday. Have you dealt with anything like this?" And I froze a little bit, but I took a breath and I just told her, I was like, "Yeah, when I was 13, my grandmother, that was her funeral. Like that's something that I remember every year on my birthday." And I offered her like some words, like, hey, if you ever want to just talk to somebody who understands, like, let me know. And this was before we knew that that was going to happen. But um, just having the abortion conversation lingering and the media thrown in my face, and then being surrounded by people actively grieving, their grandmother, and my girlfriend's mother, her mom, and the preparations and what everybody's going through and hearing about it, I that wasn't triggering for me necessarily, but I would say I was activated. I wasn't myself. I was like focused on home and taking care of the things that needed to be taken care of, like making sure that the animals have been fed and keeping the place clean, making sure that everybody eats, right? Like I took on that role. And even though I was doing that, Dakota felt very disconnected from me, like emotionally. Like she was with her family and, being there with them, being there for them, being strong for them. And I'm like here thinking that I need to be strong for her. And what that looks like is me not being engaged emotionally, which manifested in behaviors of, while, sex and dating and relationships weren't something that was accessible this year. It became work. Like I immersed myself in work and all these creative projects as an avoidance mechanism for having to deal with what was coming up for me. And she like called me out. Like we were unnecessarily just fighting. And I was like, yo, there's no room for my emotions. And that was a story that I told myself until I talked to her about it. And she was like, I need you to be vulnerable with me. And then I was met with things around this as well that made me see like, oh, if I'm not vulnerable with her, I'm gonna lose her. Because regardless if I'm providing and protecting, like Red Pill says you should be doing, if she doesn't feel connected to me, like she can get that shit anywhere. She said it. She's like, if I just wanted somebody to like take care of me, like that I could do that. But like I like you. I love you. I want to feel connected to you. So I broke the fuck down and I was like, yo, this is fucking hard. This is activating. I don't think I said activating. I might have said triggering because it's like it's in my face. Like it's here. I'm watching y'all go through, and remind me of what my family was going through. And I know that this is gonna be something that your sister has to go through. And it was just like amplified, amplified, amplified. And it was in that sharing and crying that like that was what she wanted. I don't think she wanted to make me cry, but she just wanted something real, right? And I think that in looking through my grief specifically, I think that unconsciously I was looking for something real, and what that manifested as was just a lot of sexual relationships that I could still keep open for something real, despite like whatever conflicting beliefs about non-monogamy. And if I have multiple relationships, then that means that one of these people will eventually prove themselves to be able to meet me with what it is that I really want. But how can you do that when you don't even know what you really want? And it took for me to see Dakota and fuck it up in a sense and be able to see like, oh, okay, like damn, like timing wise it was terrible, but now I've seen it, and it isn't really fair to her that some of the past patterns and habits going into this relationship as it is now, um, there wasn't, it's not really fair to ask for a grace period for something like that. um, for her to have been so sure about me before I was so sure about her, but not really transparent in what that looked like. And so the what grief has done, what grief does is disrupt my intentionality. It disrupts our decision making. And I don't think we talk about it enough. I don't think that we talk about grief enough to be able to dissect like what's in there for us to learn. And I was able to learn that I need to be loved differently, right? Like I don't give a fuck about being respected. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Let me not say that. I care about being respected, but that ain't enough. I need love. And for this woman to challenge me, for her to support me, for her to celebrate me, even when she ain't got all the spoons for it, like I still see her show up in the best ways that she can, when she can. And it's in having seen grief outside myself, expressed vulnerably, like being with somebody a lot, you get to know them in a way that you can't get to know somebody who is with other people often and a lot, right? Like maybe you can, some people do, but that wasn't the case for me. That wasn't my experience. And so like I'm very just grateful to have this relationship and the emotional safety to be able to express myself in this relationship because I'm healing. And that is something that is a priority to me. People be talking about, oh yeah, growth is a priority. Growth, growth, growth. You can't grow without healing. And you also heal through the strides of growth. Like you kind of have to. These two things do they should go hand in hand, but I think that the way a lot of people use growth is often like as a dismissive excuse to be able to do some fuck shit. Sometimes that's what it is. We can call it what it is. So that's that's my experience with grief, and I look at grief from a yoga therapy perspective, and uh, as Antonio from Yoga for Grief Relief, he says, um, with our loved ones, they're never lost. They're always like they're woven into the tapestry of our heart. And I feel that. I resonate with that. Because, yeah, my grandma may not be physically here, but her fucking impact is. Life's about what happens through you, not to you. And if I happen through her for all that I do and all that I've done to continue to happen through me, she ain't gone. And even my grandmothers before her, right? Like all that is happening, despite the physical loss, despite the disruption of that attachment, it's through being able to not be non-attached and let go that I'm able to honestly say like this is the most healing thing for me, y'all. And so I encourage you to, if you have access to a mental health professional, a therapist, or someone, even somebody who, has experience in a therapy, right? Like I told you, I'm currently studying to be a yoga therapist, and I very much look forward to incorporating this into my men's work. Maybe a lot of the woo-woo stuff maybe, doesn't have to, I don't even want to call it woo-woo stuff, man. That's not an accurate depiction. We're talking about the elements. We're talking about the subtle bodies. We're talking about the mind. We're talking about how we breathe, somatics. Yeah, I'm not gonna say that. Like I want to incorporate this into my work um, with men so that women don't have to do all of the heavy lifting anymore, right? So if we have more men who are offering this somatic healing, the holistic, looking at our emotions, we don't have to burden women with that. And for them to get the back brunt of our, you know, our not living or the front brunt, however the fuck you say it, them not having to deal with us not having done our own emotional work because of our consequences on them of our physical actions because we didn't look at our emotions and do whatever work needed to be done on ourselves and healing, I think we'd have a lot more healthy relationships. I ain't gonna say people will stop being non-monogamous. Like some people are really enjoying that lifestyle and great for them. I don't like how, and this is another podcast episode. I really don't like how I would say like treatment towards me and my partner's like changed. My girlfriend have changed since becoming monogamous. I think that that's something to speak to another day. But this is just my experience with grief. I hope that this example serves you to be able to inquire on your own. If you need to do some journaling, do that. I'm available for one-on-one donation-based like peer support calls if you want to go to the emotional support calls tab, or if you are curious about what yoga therapy can do for you, if you want to just have an intro call, just submit the intake form. We'll have a conversation, and I'll explain to you, what yoga has to say about whatever it is that you're sharing. And yeah, we'll work to it through there. I'm working with people with herpes through my nonprofit, Something Positive for Positive People, and I want to continue to make this kind of resource available and accessible to everybody. So it took me so long to just record this, but I think timing wise, like it just had to happen the way that it did. I appreciate y'all for taking the time to listen. If you can, please attend the Black Men's Emotional Wellness Symposium, which is being held Saturday, November 30th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. At 9:15, we will open with a yoga class. If anyone wants to get up there early and join and just get themselves ready for and centered for a day of really good conversations. All right. Thank y'all for listening. This is Self. I'm Courtney Brain.